She probably thought the girl paid for that first-class ticket with a welfare check. A young black woman, dressed in a simple gray sweatsuit, looking more like she belonged in coach than in seat 2A. So Brenda, the senior flight attendant, with a chip on her shoulder the size of a carry-on, decided to make an example of her. She manufactured a complaint, escalated it with practiced ease, and had the woman kicked off the plane. She felt a smug sense of satisfaction as the gate door closed. What Brenda didn't know was that the woman she'd just humiliated wasn't just any passenger. And in 7 minutes, the phone call that young woman made on the jet bridge would trigger a series of events that would not only end Brenda's career, but would make that same girl the new owner of the entire airline. The air in the first-class cabin of Aura Airlines, Flight 723 from New York to Chicago, was a familiar mix of chilled recycled air, expensive perfume, and the faint, leathery scent of privilege. Amara Washington settled into seat 2A, a plush cocoon of beige leather that felt worlds away from the frantic energy of JFK. She was dressed for comfort, not for impressing anyone. A soft gray hoodie, matching sweatpants, and a pair of worn-in sneakers. At 28, she had already learned that true power didn't need to announce itself with designer labels. It announced itself with results. Her phone vibrated. A text from Mr. Harrison, her lead counsel. "Board is spooked. Davenport is trying to rally them. They see our offer as a lowball, hostile takeover." Amara typed a quick reply, her thumbs moving with practiced speed. "Hostility is a matter of perspective, Robert. To a drowning man, a lifeboat can look aggressive. Remind them their Q3 earnings report is about to make our offer look like a golden parachute. Hold firm. I'll be unreachable for the next 2 hours." She was on her way to Chicago for the final, brutal phase of this negotiation. Aura Holdings Inc., the parent company of the airline she was currently sitting on, was bleeding money. A combination of poor management, aging fleets, and a disastrous fuel hedging strategy had left them vulnerable. Her firm, Washington Capital Acquisitions, specialized in finding such wounded companies, restructuring them, and turning them into profitable assets. It was a high-stakes game, and she was the best player in the city. "Can I get you something to drink before we take off, miss?" Amara looked up from her phone. The flight attendant was a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of stiff, blonde hair and a name tag that read Brenda. Her smile was a thin, tight line that didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, were doing a swift, dismissive inventory of Amara's attire. "Just some water, please." "No ice," Amara said, returning the smile with genuine warmth that was not reciprocated. Brenda's lips tightened further. "Of course. Water." She said the word as if it were a foreign concept in this part of the plane. She turned to the man in the suit across the aisle, her entire demeanor shifting. "Mr. Peterson, a pleasure to have you with us again. The usual Macallan 18 before we push back?" Amara ignored the blatant shift in tone. She'd faced far worse than a surly flight attendant. Petty slights were the background noise of her life. She had trained herself to filter them out in favor of focusing on the multi-billion-dollar signal. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. This one from the head of her analytics team. A critical piece of data she'd been waiting for. She needed to respond before they were ordered to switch to airplane mode. She leaned forward slightly, instinctively lowering her voice as she began to dictate a voice-to-text message. "Penelope, cross-reference the debt-to-equity ratio with their European subsidiaries' performance metrics. I suspect Davenport is hiding liabilities in the international balance sheets. We need to find that toxic asset before the meeting tomorrow. It's the final nail." "Ma'am!" The voice was sharp, cutting through the cabin's quiet murmur. It was Brenda, her hands on her hips, her face a mask of indignation. "Ma'am, I will not have you being disruptive. You need to end your phone call immediately. We are preparing for departure." Amara lowered her phone, blinking. "I'm not on a call," she explained calmly. "I'm sending a text message." "I heard you," Brenda snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "You were talking loudly, being aggressive. Several passengers have noted your disruptive behavior." Amara glanced around. Mr. Peterson across the aisle was pointedly looking out the window. A young woman in 3B looked up from her laptop with a confused frown. No one seemed to be complaining. In fact, the only disruptive element in the serene cabin was Brenda herself. "I can assure you, My voice was at a very low volume, Amara said, keeping her own voice steady and even. I apologize if it disturbed you, but I'm simply finishing a critical work message before we take off. Brenda took a step closer, invading Amara's personal space. She was leaning in, her voice now a venomous whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. I know your type. You think because you scrounged up enough money for one fancy ticket, the rules don't apply to you. You're being aggressive, and your tone is unacceptable. Now put the phone away, or I will have you removed from this aircraft. The accusation hung in the air, thick and ugly. Your type, the phrase echoed in the silent cabin. It was a classic, thinly veiled slur designed to put her in her place. Amara felt a familiar cold anger begin to pool in her stomach, but she suppressed it. Emotion was a liability. Logic was a weapon. Your accusation is baseless, Amara stated, her voice devoid of emotion. You are creating a scene over a text message. I would advise you to step back and reconsider your approach. Reconsider? I am the lead flight attendant on this plane. My authority is final. Brenda's face was now flushed, her sense of power overriding any semblance of professionalism. You have an attitude problem. You are a security risk. That's it. I'm done. She turned on her heel and marched toward the cockpit. A few moments later, she returned, followed by the gate agent and a burly airport security officer. The performance was complete. Ma'am, the gate agent said, looking deeply uncomfortable. The flight crew has made the decision to deplane you. Please gather your belongings and come with me. A collective, soft gasp went through the cabin. The man in the suit now looked mortified. The young woman in 3B had her phone out, discreetly recording the entire interaction. Amara looked at Brenda, whose face was a triumphant smirk. She had won. She had successfully wielded her minuscule authority to humiliate a passenger who didn't fit her preconceived notion of who belonged in first class. Amara did not argue. She did not raise her voice or plead her case. Arguing with a zealot was a fool's errand. Instead, a chillingly calm resolve settled over her. Brenda had mistaken her composure for weakness. She had mistaken her simple clothes for a simple mind. It was a fatal miscalculation. Slowly, deliberately, Amara stood up. She picked up her small backpack from under the seat in front of her. She looked the security guard in the eye. There is no need for force. I will exit voluntarily. She walked down the aisle, her back straight, her head held high. She could feel every eye in the cabin on her. As she reached the open door of the aircraft, she paused and turned to look back at Brenda, who stood by the galley, arms crossed, radiating smug victory. Amara didn't say a word. She just held Brenda's gaze for a long, silent moment. In that moment, an entire strategy session took place in her mind. The terms of the deal were about to change. The polite, professional takeover was now off the table. This was personal. She stepped out onto the jet bridge. The gate agent was stammering apologies, trying to explain how she could rebook. Amara held up a hand to silence him. She pulled out her phone. She didn't call customer service. She didn't call a family member to complain. She scrolled to a single contact and pressed the call button. Mr. Harrison answered on the first ring. Amara, what's wrong? I thought you'd be in the air. Amara watched through the window as the ground crew pushed Flight 723 back from the gate. She could see Brenda's silhouette moving inside. Change of plans, Robert, Amara said, her voice as cold and clear as ice. And a change of terms. Forget the offer. I want you to initiate a hostile takeover. Immediately. I don't want to buy a majority stake in Aura Holdings anymore. There was a pause on the other end of the line. What do you want, Amara? Amara watched the plane begin to taxi toward the runway. I want to buy the entire company, every last share, and I want you to use their own corporate bylaws to call an emergency shareholder vote to oust the entire board of directors, including the CEO. Tell Penelope to find me that toxic asset. We're not using it as a nail in the coffin anymore. What are we using it for? Harrison asked, his voice laced with a mixture of confusion and excitement. We're using it as a sledgehammer, Amara replied. I want to own this airline by the time that plane lands in Chicago. It was precisely 7 minutes after she had been kicked off the plane. The sterile quiet of the Aura Airlines Polaris lounge was a stark contrast to the public humiliation Amara had just endured. She found a secluded corner, a small alcove with a leather armchair and a view of the tarmac. The frantic energy that had propelled her onto the jet bridge now coalesced into a laser-like focus. The insult had been the spark, but the fire now burning within her was pure, unadulterated business strategy. She plugged her laptop into a charging port and set up a mobile hotspot. Within seconds, her personal space was transformed into a command center. A video call window popped up on her screen. On the other side were Robert Harrison, her 60-something, silver-haired chief counsel, whose calm demeanor masked a legal mind as sharp as a shard of glass, and Penelope Vance, her head of analytics, a data prodigy barely older than Amara herself, who could make spreadsheets sing and balance sheets confess their deepest secrets. "Okay, lay it out for me," Harrison began, his face a grim mask on the screen. "A flight attendant deplaned you? On what grounds?" "The official reason will likely be disruptive and aggressive behavior," Amara said, taking a sip of the bottled water she'd grabbed. "The real reason is that she didn't like the color of my skin or the brand of my sweatpants. It doesn't matter. Don't waste a single second on the incident itself. That's PR, and we'll deal with it later. For now, it's just fuel. I want to focus on the acquisition." Penelope leaned into her camera, her eyes bright with intensity. "Amara, a full hostile takeover. That's a different beast. We've been positioning for a negotiated majority stake. Shifting now means we go public with our intent. It'll be a war." "Good," Amara said flatly. "I'm in the mood for a war. What's their vulnerability right now? This very second?" Penelope's fingers flew across her keyboard. A series of charts and graphs filled her side of the screen. "Their stock, AHI, is already depressed. It closed at $14.25 yesterday. The impending Q3 earnings report is catastrophic. We project it will drop their price below $10. Davenport and the board know this. They've been trying to secure a private equity bridge loan to weather the storm, using their European subsidiary, Aura Intercontinental, as collateral." "And that's where the toxic asset is," Amara prompted. "Exactly," Penelope confirmed. "Aura Intercontinental isn't the cash cow they claim. It's a liability pit. They have massive, undisclosed pension obligations tied to legacy contracts with German and French pilot unions. These obligations don't show up on a standard quarterly report. They're buried in footnotes and deferred compensation schedules. We estimate the unfunded liability to be in the neighborhood of $400 million. Harrison whistled softly. "If that gets out, no one will give them a loan. Their credit will be shot. The stock will crater." "And that," Amara said, a predatory smile touching her lips for the first time, "is our sledgehammer. Penelope, I want you to package that data. Create a concise, undeniable, and utterly devastating report. No jargon, just the raw, ugly numbers. I want it ready to be disseminated to every major financial news outlet and our key institutional shareholder contacts within the hour." "It will light a fire under the stock," Penelope warned. "It'll start a panic sell." "That's the point," Amara said. "We're not negotiating with Richard Davenport anymore. We are going to orchestrate a complete collapse in shareholder confidence. We'll trigger a run on the stock. While everyone else is panicking and selling, we will be buying." Harrison interjected, his legal mind running through the permutations. "We'll need to issue a tender offer, a public bid to purchase shareholder stock at a premium above the new crash market price. It'll have to be fast and aggressive. We need to acquire controlling interest before the board can mount a defense, like a poison pill strategy." "What's their cash-on-hand situation?" Amara asked. "Dire," Penelope answered immediately. "They have enough operating cash for maybe another 6 weeks. They can't afford to fight a prolonged battle. They can't afford to buy back their own stock to drive up the price. They are, for all intents and purposes, defenseless if their credit line is cut." "Excellent." Amara's gaze was fixed on the planes taking off outside her window. One of them was Flight 723, now a distant speck in the sky. On board, Brenda was probably serving drinks, feeling secure in her petty victory. "Robert, draft the tender offer. We'll set the price at $11 per share. It's a significant premium over the sub-$10 price it will hit once Penelope's report goes live, but a bargain for us. It will look like a generous rescue to the terrified shareholders." "And the emergency vote to oust the board?" Harrison asked. "Check the Aura Holdings bylaws. There should be a provision for shareholders with a significant stake, say 20%, to call an emergency meeting. The panic selling will be our cover. As we accumulate shares, No one will realize how quickly we're consolidating power. By the time they figure it out, we'll already have the stake we need to force the meeting. This is incredibly aggressive, Amara, Harrison said, not as a criticism, but as a statement of fact. The fallout will be immense. The fallout began when a representative of their company decided I was aggressive for sending a text message, Amara retorted, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. Richard Davenport and his board fostered a corporate culture where an employee like Brenda felt empowered to act on her prejudices. That is a failure of leadership, and when leadership fails, it must be replaced. This isn't just about revenge, Robert. It's about principle. A company rots from the head down. I'm not just buying an airline. I'm performing an exorcism. For the next hour, the lounge alcove was a whirlwind of activity. Penelope finalized her devastating report on the hidden liabilities. Harrison, with the help of his team back at the office, drafted the legal framework for a hostile tender offer. Amara, acting as the central command, coordinated their efforts, making decisions with breathtaking speed and precision. She approved the wording of the press release that would accompany Penelope's data bomb, ensuring it was factual, incendiary, and legally airtight. She authorized the transfer of nearly $2 billion from her firm's acquisition fund into a holding account, ready to be deployed. As they were finalizing the last details, Penelope's face suddenly changed. Amara, you need to see this. She shared her screen. A video was going viral on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The hashtag Aura Airlines assault was trending. The video, grainy but clear, was shot from the perspective of a passenger sitting behind Amara. It showed the entire encounter with Brenda. It captured Amara's calm demeanor and Brenda's escalating, aggressive tirade. It clearly caught the phrase, "I know your type." The internet was erupting. Well, Amara said, watching the clip of her own humiliation, that saves our PR team some work. The court of public opinion is already in session. Harrison looked grim. This makes it messy. No, Amara corrected him. This makes it righteous. Now, when we take over, we won't just be seen as corporate raiders. We'll be seen as saviors. Release the report, Penelope. Robert, file the tender offer with the SEC. Let's begin. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the tarmac. In Chicago, Richard Davenport, CEO of Aura Holdings, was probably having a cocktail, blissfully unaware that the foundations of his entire world were about to be systematically dismantled by a woman in a gray sweatsuit, sitting in one of his own airport lounges. The predator had been provoked, and now she was on the hunt. Richard Davenport, CEO of Aura Holdings, Inc., prided himself on his unflappability. He was a man who navigated corporate turbulence with the steady hand of a seasoned pilot. But the morning after Flight 723, his composure was fraying at the edges like an old rope. His day had started with a 5 a.m. call from his frantic head of public relations. The video was everywhere. Aura Airlines' assault wasn't just trending, it was a global phenomenon. News outlets from CNN to the BBC had picked it up. His airline, his brand, was being portrayed as a hostile environment, a cesspool of systemic prejudice. We've issued a statement, the PR head had chirped nervously over the phone. We've suspended the employee pending a full investigation. We're deeply sorry and committed to diversity. Is it working? Richard had grunted, splashing cold water on his face. It's like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. That had been the start. The second call, an hour later, had been from his chief financial officer. It was far worse. Richard, we have a 5-alarm fire, the CFO, a man named George, had said, his voice strained with panic. A report was released overnight by an anonymous source, but it's being attributed to a leak from inside Washington Capital Acquisitions. It details the European pension liabilities, the ones we buried. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. How? I don't know how, but it's out there. The market is reacting. Pre-market trading has our stock in a nosedive. We're down 30% already. Our creditors are calling. The bridge loan is dead. They're pulling our credit line. The world began to spin. The PR crisis was a headwind. This was a catastrophic engine failure. By the time he arrived at the Aura Holdings headquarters in downtown Chicago, a gleaming tower that suddenly felt more like a tomb, the situation had devolved into pure chaos. The stock had opened at $9.50 and was still falling. Every phone on the executive floor was ringing. Then came the third blow. An official filing with the SEC, a hostile tender offer from Washington Capital Acquisitions to purchase all outstanding shares of AHI for $11 per share. It was a masterstroke of predatory capitalism. The offer was a life raft to shareholders who were watching their investment burn on the pyre of the day's news. They would sell. They would sell in droves. At 10 a.m., his assistant buzzed him, her voice trembling. "Mr. Davenport, you've been summoned to an emergency board meeting. It was called an hour ago." "By who?" Richard demanded. "I'm the chairman of the board. I call the meetings." "It was invoked under Bylaw 7.4, she stammered. "An entity that has acquired a 20% stake can force a vote. It seems Washington Capital has already acquired it." Richard stared at the phone. It was impossible. Acquiring that much stock, that quickly, without anyone noticing. It was financial warfare on a scale he couldn't comprehend. He walked into the 40th floor boardroom like a man walking to his own execution. The board members were already assembled, their faces a mixture of fear and anger. They were rich, powerful people, and they were used to being in control. Today they were passengers on a plane spiraling out of control. "What the hell is going on, Richard?" one of them snarled. "My portfolio is down 8 figures because one of your flight attendants couldn't keep her mouth shut." Before Richard could answer, the boardroom doors opened again. In walked Robert Harrison, the legendary lawyer from Washington Capital, his presence radiating an authority that dwarfed everyone else's in the room. But it was the person who walked in beside him that made Richard Davenport's heart stop. It was the woman from the video. She was no longer in a gray sweatsuit. She wore a tailored navy blue power suit that was probably worth more than his car. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant style, and her eyes, calm and assessing, swept across the room, landing on him. There was no anger in them. There was something far more terrifying: ownership. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard sputtered, gesturing at her. "Who is this?" "This is a private meeting of the board." Robert Harrison stepped forward, a thin file in his hand. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to your new largest shareholder. This is Amara Washington, the founder and managing partner of Washington Capital Acquisitions." A stunned silence fell over the room. Jaws literally dropped. The board members looked from Amara to the viral video, playing on a nearby screen and back again. The dots connected with the sickening clang of a jail cell door slamming shut. The passenger they had allowed to be humiliated was the very predator who was now devouring them whole. Amara walked to the head of the table, the traditional seat of the chairman, and placed her briefcase on it. She didn't wait for an invitation to sit. She looked directly at Richard Davenport. "You're in my seat, Mr. Davenport," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of the billions of dollars she now controlled. Richard, looking pale and shrunken, stared at her, speechless. "As of 10:01 a.m. this morning," Harrison announced to the room, "Washington Capital Acquisitions has successfully purchased 38% of the outstanding shares of Aura Holdings, Inc. We have exercised our right to call this meeting for one purpose: a vote of no confidence in the current executive board and the immediate removal of Richard Davenport as CEO and chairman." He began passing out documents, proxies, voting forms, legal notices. It was a perfectly executed ambush. Amara finally spoke to the entire room. Her voice was calm, measured, and utterly devastating. "For the past 6 months, my firm has been analyzing your company. We saw a legacy brand being run into the ground by mismanagement, short-sightedness, and a palpable lack of vision. Your fundamentals are weak, your debt is crippling, and your brand image is, as of yesterday, in the toilet." She paused, letting the words sink in. "My initial plan was to acquire a majority stake and work with you to right the ship. I believe in second chances. However, yesterday, on one of your own aircraft, I was given a front-row seat to the corporate culture you have fostered, Mr. Davenport. A culture where prejudice is disguised as procedure. A culture where an employee feels empowered to humiliate a customer based on their appearance. That is not just a PR problem. It is a symptom of a deep systemic sickness within this company. And it starts at the top." She gestured to the chair Richard was still frozen in. "That incident," she continued, her voice hardening slightly, Convinced me that a partnership was no longer viable. A turnaround isn't enough. This company doesn't need a renovation. It needs a demolition and a rebuild. And I am the architect. She looked around at the stunned faces of the board members. Washington Capital now controls the single largest voting bloc in this company. The motions on the table are not suggestions, they are formalities. You can vote with us and perhaps retain a shred of dignity, or you can vote against us and be swept aside regardless. The choice is yours. Richard Davenport finally found his voice, a weak, reedy thing. This is unethical. You used that incident, used it. Amara cut him off, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. Mr. Davenport, you seem to be under the impression that I am the villain in this story. Let me be clear. Your employee, acting under the authority you granted her, publicly accosted and deplaned me based on a racist assumption. Your company's weak financial position, which you tried to hide from your own shareholders, is what made this takeover possible. I didn't create this situation. I am merely capitalizing on the opportunities you and your team provided me. This isn't unethical. This is consequence. She sat down in the chair next to the head of the table and opened her briefcase. The ambush was over. The occupation had begun. While Amara Washington was seizing control of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, Brenda Jenkins was enjoying what she thought was a well-deserved day off. She had woken up late, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. She'd handled that situation perfectly. She had asserted her authority, removed a problematic passenger, and maintained the integrity of her cabin. She had shown that young woman with the attitude that rules were rules, no matter how much her ticket cost. She poured herself a coffee and scrolled through Facebook on her phone. Her daughter had posted a new photo of the grandkids. Her cousin was complaining about politics. It was a normal Tuesday. Then a friend sent her a message. "Brenda, is this you? This is going everywhere." There was a link attached. Brenda clicked it, a small knot of unease tightening in her stomach. It led to a Twitter page. The video was shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. She watched herself, her face contorted in a sneer, leaning over the young black woman. She heard her own voice shrill and accusatory. She heard herself say the words, "I know your type." The blood drained from her face. The coffee cup trembled in her hand. It wasn't how she remembered it. In her memory, she was the calm professional, and the passenger was the aggressive one. But the video told a different story. The video showed a bully. The comments section was a torrent of pure vitriol. "Fire this racist hag immediately. Yora Airlines. The audacity of this Karen in the sky. Hope she never works again. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen." The passenger was so calm. Brenda is the one who should have been kicked off. Her name. They were using her name. Her full name was being posted, along with screenshots of her Facebook profile. People were finding her. Her phone began to ring. It was Aura Airlines crew scheduling. "Brenda, this is dispatch. We're taking you off the line for your next 2 trips. You need to report to corporate headquarters in Chicago tomorrow at 10 a.m. for a meeting with HR and the VP of In-Flight Services." The voice was cold, official. There was no warmth, no camaraderie. "What is this about?" Brenda asked, her voice a weak croak. "I think you know," the dispatcher said, and hung up. Panic, hot and suffocating, set in. She tried to tell herself it was just a suspension, a slap on the wrist. They had to do it for appearances. The company always protected its senior crew members. They had to. She had been with them for 35 years. She had given them her life. She spent the rest of the day in a state of frantic denial, compulsively checking the internet. The story was getting worse. News articles were now connecting the viral video to a sudden, catastrophic collapse in Aura Airlines' stock price. They mentioned a hostile takeover bid. It didn't make sense. How could her little incident cause all of this? It was impossible. The media was just being dramatic. That evening, her daughter called, her voice strained. "Mom, what did you do? My friends are sending me this video. They're saying horrible things about you, about our family." "It's a misunderstanding, honey," Brenda pleaded. She was being aggressive. The video doesn't show everything. But even as she said the words, she knew they were hollow. The video showed enough. The next morning, Brenda put on her most professional uniform. She styled her hair perfectly. She put on a brave face. This was a formality. She would explain her side of the story, calmly and rationally. They would understand. They would have her back. When she arrived at the gleaming Aura Tower in Chicago, the atmosphere was funereal. Employees scurried through the lobby, avoiding eye contact, speaking in hushed tones. The usual morning bustle was replaced by a palpable sense of dread. She was escorted to the 40th floor, the executive floor. This was unusual. A meeting like this would normally be in the HR building near the airport. Why were they meeting here? She was led to a small glass-walled conference room adjacent to the main boardroom. Inside, waiting for her, were her direct union representative, looking grim, the vice president of in-flight services, a woman she'd known for 20 years who now wouldn't meet her eye, and a severe-looking man in a suit she didn't recognize from the legal department. "Brenda, please have a seat," the VP said, her voice stripped of all warmth. "As you know, an incident occurred on Flight 723 yesterday, an incident which you instigated." "I was following procedure," Brenda began, her rehearsed speech ready. "The passenger was non-compliant and creating a disturbance." "Stop," the lawyer cut in, his voice sharp. "Just stop. We have statements from 17 other passengers, including the first-class crew member who was working with you. They all state the passenger was calm and that you were the sole escalator. We have the video, which has, as of this morning, caused an estimated $200 million in brand value destruction. And your actions have triggered a chain of events that has led to a hostile takeover of this entire corporation." Brenda stared at him, her mouth agape. "What? That's insane. That's not my fault." The VP of In-Flight Services finally looked at her. Her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. "Brenda, the woman you removed from that flight was Amara Washington." The name meant nothing to Brenda. The lawyer clarified. "The founder and sole owner of Washington Capital Acquisitions, the firm that, as of this morning, is our new controlling shareholder. The meeting to finalize your termination is happening right now in the main boardroom. They just wanted you close by." The floor seemed to drop out from under Brenda's chair. The reality of the situation crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow. The sweatsuit-clad girl, the quiet one she had dismissed so easily, was the architect of this corporate apocalypse. Her petty act of prejudice hadn't just been a mistake, it had been a company-killing blunder. She owns the airline," Brenda whispered, the words barely audible. The lawyer gave a grim, humorless smile. "She's about to. And you, Ms. Jenkins, were the catalyst. Your service record was reviewed this morning. 17 official passenger complaints over the last 10 years, all with similar racial and class-based undertones. The company has settled 3 lawsuits confidentially that stemmed from your behavior. We protected you, we enabled you, and you repaid us by handing the keys to our kingdom over to our biggest adversary." Brenda felt a profound, dizzying vertigo. Her sense of self, built on 35 years of seniority and perceived authority, crumbled into dust. She wasn't a respected senior crew member. She was a liability, a walking disaster that had finally, spectacularly detonated. Through the glass wall, she could see movement in the main boardroom. She saw the powerful men and women of the board, looking defeated, and she saw her, Amara Washington. She was standing at the head of the table, commanding the room not with shouts but with an unshakable, terrifying calm. Then the door to her small room opened. Richard Davenport, the now former CEO, was escorted out by security, his face ashen. As he passed, his eyes met Brenda's. In them, she saw a reflection of her own ruin. Another figure appeared in the doorway. It was Amara Washington. She wasn't looking at the VP or the lawyer. She was looking directly at Brenda. Her expression was not one of anger or triumph. It was one of finality. It was the look of a problem being solved. Brenda's world, once as large as the sky she flew through, had shrunk to the size of this glass box, with the woman she had wronged standing as her judge, jury, and executioner. Amara Washington stepped into the small conference room. The air was thick with the stench of fear and failure. The union rep, the VP, the lawyer, they all seemed to shrink in her presence. Only Brenda Jenkins remained seated, looking like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and shattered, the pieces loosely held together by her pristine uniform. Amara pulled up a chair and sat directly across from her. She placed a tablet on the table between them, but didn't turn it on yet. She simply looked at Brenda, her gaze analytical, like a scientist studying a specimen. "Brenda," Amara began, her voice calm and even. It was the same calm, even voice she had used on the plane, but now it carried the weight of absolute power. "Do you know why you're here?" Brenda swallowed, her throat dry. "To be fired," she rasped. "That's the outcome, yes," Amara agreed, "but it's not the reason. Being fired is a simple administrative action. This is an education. For you and for every single employee who will hear about this day. I want you to understand the full scope of the consequences of your actions." She turned on the tablet. The first thing that appeared was the viral video. She didn't play it. She just let the thumbnail image sit there. Brenda's snarling face leaning over Amara's calm one. "This video has been viewed over 150 million times globally," Amara stated, as if reading a weather report. "It has been featured on every major news network. It has been shared by celebrities, politicians, and activists. It has become a textbook example of corporate prejudice." She swiped the screen. A stock chart appeared, showing a red line plunging off a cliff. "This is the stock price of Aura Holdings, Inc. That precipitous drop began approximately 1 hour after your video went viral. It coincided with a report my firm released detailing the financial instability this company's leadership tried to hide. Your actions created the perfect storm. You provided the moral justification for the corporate execution I was about to perform." Brenda flinched. I didn't know who you were." It was the only defense she had left, a pathetic plea of ignorance. "And that is the most damning fact of all," Amara said, leaning forward slightly. "You didn't know who I was, which means you would have done this to anyone who looked like me. A doctor, a teacher, a student, a mother. You treated me this way because you saw a black woman in a sweatsuit, and you made a judgment. You assumed I was poor, that I was out of place, that I was beneath you. You weren't enforcing rules, Brenda. You were enforcing your own bigotry. Your authority as a flight attendant was merely a weapon you used to do it." Amara swiped the screen again. A document appeared. It was Brenda's internal HR file. 17 formal complaints, Amara read aloud, her voice cool and precise. June 2012, complaint from a Hispanic family you accused of being too loud. November 2014, complaint from a man of Middle Eastern descent you repeatedly singled out for suspicious behavior. March 2018, a complaint from a young Asian couple you refused to serve, claiming they were rude, though all witnesses disagreed. And 3 lawsuits, settled out of court, all alleging racial profiling and discrimination. This company's leadership, she glanced at the VP, who looked ill, is complicit. They saw a pattern of behavior and chose to bury it, to protect you, rather than address the poison in their system. That failure in leadership has now cost them their company. She turned the tablet back to Brenda. So yes, your employment with Aura Airlines is terminated, effective immediately. You will be escorted from the building. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Brenda seemed to sag in her chair, a wave of relief washing over her. It was over. She was fired. It was horrible, but she could survive it. She had her pension. But we're not finished, Amira added, and the relief on Brenda's face curdled back into dread. That is merely the corporate consequence. Now we address the personal one. Amara looked at her own lawyer, who had quietly entered the room. My personal legal team will be filing a civil lawsuit against you, Ms. Jenkins, for defamation of character, libel, and slander. Your false accusations of me being aggressive and a security risk are on record. They were made publicly and with malicious intent. They have caused me personal and professional harm. The video going viral does not absolve you. It merely proves the extent of the damage you have caused to my reputation. Brenda's eyes went wide. A lawsuit? You're a billionaire. What can you possibly get from me? It's not about the money, Amar said. Any damages awarded will be donated to a nonprofit organization that provides legal aid to victims of discrimination. This is about accountability. You used your position to attack me. I will use my position to ensure you understand that such actions have a price. Your pension, your savings, your home, They will all be subject to the judgment we will win. You will not find work in the airline industry again. In fact, a simple Google search of your name will now forever link you to this incident. You sought to make me an example. Instead, you have become one. It was a systematic, soul-crushing dismantling of a person's life, delivered without a single raised voice. Brenda finally broke. Sobs racked her body, pathetic, gulping sounds of a life imploding. "Please," she wept. "Please, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I'm not a bad person." Amara stood up, her face a mask of cold resolution. "You are a person who made a choice," she said, looking down at the weeping woman. "You chose to be cruel because you thought you could get away with it. You just chose the wrong person on the wrong day. The world is full of people who don't have the resources to fight back against people like you. My lawsuit won't just be for me, it will be for every single one of them." "Enjoy your retirement, Brenda." Amara turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the wreckage of a life that had been ruined by its own small-minded hatred. She didn't look back. She had a company to run. 6 months later, Amara Washington sat in seat 2A of a newly refurbished Aura Airlines Airbus A321. The cabin was no longer a drab beige, but a tasteful charcoal, gray, and deep blue. The lighting was softer, the seats were more comfortable, and the entire atmosphere felt different, calmer, more professional. The airline, now privately held by Washington Capital, had been rebranded from the inside out. The changes were more than just cosmetic. Amara had initiated a complete overhaul of the company's culture. The old executive board was gone, replaced by a diverse and dynamic team of aviation and logistics experts. She had invested heavily in new, more fuel-efficient aircraft. But the biggest investment had been in people. Every single one of Aura's 20,000 employees, from the baggage handlers to the pilots, had gone through a mandatory, intensive retraining program. It wasn't the standard, box-checking corporate diversity seminar. It was a rigorous course in de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and implicit bias, designed by leading sociologists and psychologists. Pay had been increased across the board, and new clear-cut policies on passenger interactions were implemented with a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. A young flight attendant with a warm, genuine smile approached her. His name tag read, Miguel. "Ms. Washington," he said, his voice respectful but not fawning. "Can I get you anything before we take off? We have sparkling water with a fresh lemon twist if you like." "That sounds perfect, Miguel. Thank you," Amara replied with a smile. He returned moments later with the drink. "We're all very excited about the new routes to South America, ma'am. My family is from Colombia, and the direct flight to Bogota is a game changer for us." "I'm glad to hear that, Miguel," Amara said. "We believe in connecting people, not dividing them." It was a small interaction, but it was everything. It was professional, respectful, and human. It was the antithesis of her last flight on this airline. Aura Airlines was healing. Its stock, had it still been public, would have been soaring. Customer satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. It was becoming a model of how a company could not only survive a crisis, but emerge from it stronger and better. As the plane began to taxi, Amara looked out the window at the sprawling airport below. She thought briefly of Brenda Jenkins. The civil suit had been swift and decisive. The court had awarded Amara a significant sum in damages, all of which was now funding the Aura Cares Foundation, the very nonprofit she'd promised to create. News reports had painted a grim picture of Brenda's life. Her house was sold to cover legal fees. Her pension was garnished, and she was living in a small, rented apartment, unemployable and ostracized. It was a harsh outcome, but it was a direct consequence of a choice she had made. Her story had become a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms, not just at Aura, but across the entire industry. Amara felt no joy in Brenda's ruin, only a grim sense of necessary justice. Her focus was not on the past, but on the future she was building. A future where a young woman in a sweatsuit could board a plane and be judged not by her appearance, but by the simple fact that she had a ticket and a destination. The plane lifted gracefully into the sky, climbing above the clouds into the bright, clear blue. And Amara took a sip of her sparkling water, the lemon a sharp, clean taste on her tongue. The flight was smooth. The atmosphere was perfect. She was finally heading in the right direction. And that's the incredible story of how one woman's humiliation became the catalyst for a corporate revolution. It's a stark reminder that the person you look down on today might just be the person signing your paychecks or your termination papers tomorrow. This wasn't about revenge. It was about consequence. Amara Washington didn't just buy an airline. She bought accountability. She proved that the most powerful currency in the world isn't money, but principle. Brenda's story is a warning against the poison of prejudice, while Amara's is an inspiration, showing that you can fight back not by lowering yourself to their level, but by rising so high that they can no longer reach you. What do you think? Was this a case of justice served cold, or was the response too harsh? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story and want to see more tales of epic consequences and dramatic justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what we have coming up next.